The temperature sits at 40 below zero when Sarah Chen's breath crystallizes in the air, each exhalation a small cloud of ice that vanishes into the pre-dawn darkness of the Siberian forest. She's been tracking for 3 hours, following prints in the snow that tell a story she doesn't want to believe, a female tiger's tracks leading away from a den site, purposeful and determined, never circling back. Sarah kneels beside something small against the white expanse, something that shouldn't be here, shouldn't be alone, shouldn't still be alive. The tiger cub is no bigger than a house cat, his orange fur dusted with frost, his body so cold he's stopped shivering. That's the dangerous sign, the one that means hypothermia has progressed past the point where most creatures can return. Sarah strips off her thermal glove with shaking fingers, presses 2 fingers against his tiny chest, and feels it, the faintest flutter of heartbeat, stubborn and impossible. His mother's tracks disappear into the forest 3 days old, the story written in snow, a first-time mother, likely spooked by poachers, fled and never returned. The cub opens his eyes for the first time in what must be 18 hours, pupils contracting in the weak dawn light, and looks directly at Sarah Chen with a gaze that seems to see straight through her professional detachment into some deeper place she keeps carefully locked. He makes a sound, barely more than a whisper, a mew so fragile it shouldn't carry across the silence but somehow does, and in that frozen moment something shifts in the universe, some invisible thread spinning out between this dying infant and this careful woman, neither of them knowing that this single breath, this impossible eye contact, will bind them together across 24 years and rewrite everything either of them understands about love, wildness, and the spaces where 2 souls recognize each other despite every law of nature saying they shouldn't. Sarah's training kicks in automatically even as her hands tremble. 5 years of veterinary school, 3 years specializing in large predator medicine, 18 months stationed at this remote research facility in the Russian Far East, all of it crystallizes into assessment mode. Core temperature critically low, likely below 90 degrees. Respiratory rate depressed. Muscle tone nearly absent. The professional part of her brain, the part trained at Cornell and honed through dozens of field emergencies, runs the calculations coldly, survival probability less than 5%, maybe less than 3. Protocol is clear in these situations. Document the finding, record GPS coordinates, take tissue samples if the animal expires, let nature complete its course. Conservation isn't about saving every individual, it's about preserving populations, genetic diversity, ecosystem balance. That's what Dr. Volkov told her during orientation, his weathered face serious over coffee in the station's overheated kitchen. You cannot save them all, Dr. Chen. If you try, you will break yourself into pieces. She remembers nodding, understanding intellectually, believing she had the professional distance required for this work. But that was before this moment, before this particular cub, before those eyes opened and looked at her with something she can only describe as recognition even though she knows that's anthropomorphing, projecting, exactly what she's trained not to do. Sarah makes her decision in the space between heartbeats. She unzips her heavy parka, the cold hitting her body like a physical blow, and wraps the cub against her thermal underlayer. He's shockingly light, barely 3 pounds, his fur soft as dandelion down beneath the frost. She can feel his heart against her ribs, that stubborn flutter that refuses to stop. The hike back to the research station takes 90 minutes, Sarah moving as quickly as she dares across treacherous terrain, one hand pressed against the small form inside her jacket, whispering things that make no scientific sense. Stay with me. Just stay with me. We're almost there. The sky lightens by degrees, that particular Siberian dawn that comes grudgingly in late November, all steel gray and silver. Her radio crackles twice but she doesn't answer, doesn't want to explain what she's doing until it's already done, until the choice is made and there's no taking it back. The research station materializes through the trees like something from a fairy tale, all rough-hewn logs and generator lights, smoke rising from the chimney. Sarah pushes through the door into the blessed warmth of the veterinary clinic, already moving toward the emergency equipment. Maria, the night shift assistant, looks up from her computer, eyes widening. Sarah? What? But Sarah is already pulling the cub from her jacket, laying him on the heated examination table, reaching for the warming box they use for small mammals. His breathing is so shallow she can barely see his chest rise. She starts and fall line with hands that have stopped shaking, muscle memory taking over, warming fluids flowing into veins smaller than thread. Temperature probe. Heart monitor. Oxygen supplementation. Her mind narrows to this single purpose, this fragile life beneath her hands, everything else falling away until there's nothing but the work, the desperate attempt to pull this small creature back from the edge of death. Maria assists without questions, professional and efficient, warming blankets and monitoring equipment appearing exactly when needed. It's only after the cub's temperature has risen 2 degrees, after his breathing has strengthened to something approaching normal, after the immediate crisis has passed into watchful waiting, that Sarah realizes she's been crying. Tears track down her face, cold and surprising, and she wipes them away quickly, embarrassed by the display of emotion. Maria pretends not to notice, but Sarah catches the small smile on her colleague's face, the knowing look that suggests this kind of connection isn't as rare as the textbooks pretend. "What will you call him?" Maria asks quietly, adjusting the warming box temperature. Sarah hasn't thought about names, hasn't let herself get that far ahead, but the word comes to her immediately, rising from somewhere she can't identify. Rama. It's Sanskrit, from a story her grandmother told her as a child, something about princes and exile and journeys that transform. She doesn't remember the details, just the feeling of being held while her grandmother's voice wove words into magic, the safety of being loved without question or condition. The first 72 hours become a blur of vigilance. Sarah moves a cot into the clinic, sleeps in 2-hour intervals, wakes to check vital signs and adjust medications. Rama, the name has stuck, feels right in her mouth, fights his way back from the edge with a stubbornness that defies every statistical probability. His temperature stabilizes. His appetite returns, latching onto bottle formula with fierce determination. Sarah learns the specific sound of his distress cry, the subtle shift in his breathing that means his waking, the way he settles when she places her hand on his back and speaks softly. The warming box becomes their shared world, Sarah sitting beside it for hours, working on paperwork with one hand while the other rests against the glass, Rama pressing his small body against the point of contact like he can feel her presence through the barrier. Dr. Volkov visits on day 4, his expression carefully neutral as he examines Rama, reviews charts, listens to Sarah's clinical report. She keeps her voice professional, citing survival statistics and intervention protocols, framing everything in the language of research and conservation value. But when Volkov looks at her over his reading glasses, she sees something in his eyes that might be sympathy, might be concern, might be the recognition of a path he's watched others walk before her. "He is doing remarkably well," Volkov says carefully. "You have performed excellent work, Dr. Chen. But you understand the protocols, yes?" Hand-raising creates complications. Attachment is, he pauses, searching for the right word in his accented English. Problematic. For the animal. And for the caregiver. Sarah nods, throat tight, knowing he's right, knowing she should be preparing for transition to the specialized cub rearing facility in Vladivostok, knowing she should be maintaining professional distance. "I understand," she says, and it's not a lie, but it's not the whole truth either. What she understands is that something has already happened, some threshold has already been crossed, and understanding protocols doesn't make it possible to cross that line. 1 week after the rescue, Rama takes his first steady steps across the veterinary clinic floor. Sarah sits on the ground, watching as he explores beyond the warming box for the first time, his movements uncoordinated but determined, his small paws finding purchase on the linoleum. He investigates the table leg, sniffs the corner where they keep supplies, approaches a water bowl with comical caution. Then he turns, sees Sarah sitting quietly, and something extraordinary happens. He chuffs, a soft, greeting sound that tiger cubs make to their mothers, and waddles directly toward her with purpose that seems impossible for such a small creature. Sarah's training screams that she shouldn't pick him up, shouldn't reinforce this attachment, should redirect him toward independent behavior. Instead, she opens her arms and Rama climbs into her lap, burrows against her stomach, and releases a purr that vibrates through her entire body like a frequency she's been waiting her whole life to hear. The tears come again, hot and unstoppable, streaming down her face as she wraps her arms gently around this impossible miracle, this small tiger who shouldn't have survived, who chose to live, who somehow found his way into the carefully guarded spaces of her heart that she thought she'd sealed off years ago after too many losses, too many deaths she couldn't prevent, too many times when love meant nothing against the brutal mathematics of survival. Sarah bends her head until her forehead touches Rama's small skull, his fur soft against her skin, his heartbeat steady and strong against her palm, and she whispers the words that will become both promise and prophecy, the words that will reshape the next 24 years of her life into something she never planned but cannot imagine living without. You're going to make it. We're going to make it. I don't know how, but I promise you, we're going to make it. The rhythm of their days settles into something Sarah has never experienced before, a routine that feels less like work and more like devotion. Rama grows with astonishing speed, his body filling out, his movements becoming more coordinated, his personality emerging in ways that constantly surprise her. At 6 weeks old he's doubled his weight, his stripes darkening from fuzzy grey to bold orange and black, his eyes transforming from the cloudy blue of infancy to molten gold. Sarah documents everything in her research journal, pages filling with measurements and behavioral observations, but between the clinical notes she finds herself writing other things, thoughts she would never include in official reports. The way Rama tilts his head when she speaks to him, as if he's trying to understand the words themselves rather than just the tone. The specific chirp he makes when he's happy, different from his hungry cry or his lonely call. The impossible gentleness with which he plays, his claws retracted even when pouncing on her bootlaces, some innate understanding that she's fragile compared to him even though he's still small enough to hold in 2 hands. The nighttime routine becomes sacred. Sarah brings her sleeping bag into the expanded enclosure they've built for him, lies down on the concrete floor padded with blankets, and Rama curls against her side, his purring a constant rumble that lulls her into the deepest sleep she's had in years. Sometimes she wakes at 3 in the morning to find him draped across her chest, his weight increasing daily but his need for contact seemingly endless. She knows this is wrong according to every guideline, knows she's imprinting him on humans in ways that will complicate his future, but in those dark hours with his warmth against her and the sound of his breathing filling the silence, she can't bring herself to care about complications that exist in some theoretical tomorrow. This moment, this connection, feels more real than any protocol ever written. Maria notices, of course. The whole research station notices. Sarah catches the looks exchanged between staff members, the careful neutrality in their voices when they ask about Rama's progress. No one says anything directly, but she feels the weight of their concern, their knowledge that this story doesn't have an easy ending. Only Yuri, the grizzled field researcher who's worked in Siberian wildlife for 30 years, speaks plainly. He finds Sarah one evening in the enclosure, Rama asleep in her lap, her hand moving in slow strokes down his back. Yuri watches for a long moment before speaking, his voice quiet. I raised a bear cub once. Long time ago, before the regulations were so strict. Fed her from a bottle, slept beside her den, loved her like she was my own child. He pauses, and Sarah sees something ancient and painful move across his face. When they took her to the sanctuary, she cried for 3 days. He stops, clears his throat. I am telling you this not to be cruel, Dr. Chen. I am telling you because love is not always enough. Sometimes love means making choices that break your heart. Sarah wants to argue, wants to insist that this is different, that she'll find a way, but the words stick in her throat because she knows he's right. She's known since the moment she wrapped Rama in her jacket and chose to save him that this path leads somewhere painful, that every day of connection is also a day of building toward loss. Rama stirs in her sleep, makes a small sound of contentment, and Sarah tightens her arms around him imperceptibly. I know, she whispers to Yuri, to herself, to the universe that seems both cruel and generous in equal measure. I know. At 3 months old, Rama weighs 40 pounds and has graduated to eating solid meat supplemented with formula. Sarah teaches him to hunt using enrichment toys, feathered lures on fishing line that she drags across the enclosure while he stalks and pounces with growing confidence. She tells herself this is essential preparation for eventual release, proper behavioral conditioning, but truthfully she knows she's also buying time, proving to Dr. Volkov and the Conservation Board that Rama needs extended care, that she's the best qualified to provide it, that separating them now would be detrimental to his development. The rationalizations come easily, dressed in scientific language, but underneath them runs the simple truth: she cannot imagine her life without him, cannot conceive of going back to the careful emptiness that existed before that frozen morning when their paths crossed. One afternoon in early spring, Sarah sits in the enclosure working on grant applications while Rama explores the perimeter, his adolescent energy boundless. He's discovered he can climb, and she watches with divided attention as he scales the chain-link fence, his claws finding purchase in the metal diamonds. She's about to call him down when she hears it, the soft chuff he reserved specifically for her, the greeting sound that means he's noticed her presence and wants to acknowledge it. Sarah looks up fully and sees him hanging on the fence 10 feet above ground, looking down at her with what can only be described as pride, showing off his new skill. The joy on his face, if tigers can be said to have expressions of joy, is so pure and uncomplicated that Sarah feels her throat tighten with emotion she can't name. This is what love looks like, she thinks. This moment of shared delight, this simple wanting to be seen by someone who matters, this transcending of every boundary that's supposed to exist between species. She laughs, the sound surprised out of her, and calls to him. Very impressive, Rama. Now get down before you give me a heart attack. He climbs down carefully, drops the last few feet with a thud that shakes the ground, and trots over to butt his massive head against her shoulder, seeking praise and contact in equal measure. Sarah wraps her arms around his neck, buries her face in his fur that smells of sun and the particular musk that's distinctly tiger, and lets herself have this moment of perfect happiness even though she knows, that happiness this complete carries the seeds of equivalent grief. The spring turns to summer, and with it comes Dr. Volkov's gentle but firm reminder that decisions must be made. Rama is now 6 months old, 90 pounds of muscle and coordination, his playfulness taking on an edge that occasionally draws blood even when he's being careful. Sarah sports scratches on her arms, bruises on her shins from when he forgets his strength during their wrestling sessions. She doesn't mention these injuries in her reports, doesn't want to provide ammunition for the argument she knows is coming. The Conservation Board meeting happens on a Tuesday in late July, the conference room stuffy despite the open windows, 5 senior researchers sitting around the table with files and data projections spread before them. Sarah presents Rama's case with clinical precision, growth metrics, behavioral assessments, socialization progress, health markers. She proposes a graduated independence protocol, extended supervision with slowly decreasing human contact, transition to semi-wild enclosure conditions. Her voice remains steady throughout, betraying none of the panic thrumming beneath her professional demeanor. Dr. Volkov listens carefully, asks thoughtful questions, and then delivers the verdict she's been dreading. Dr. Chen, your work with the cub has been exceptional. Truly, his survival is testament to your skill and dedication. But we must think now of his future, and yours. The cub needs placement in a facility equipped for adult tigers, with the space and resources necessary for his continued development. The longer we delay, the more difficult the transition becomes. He pauses, his eyes kind but immovable. We recommend transfer to the Primorski Safari Park within the next 60 days. They have an excellent program for hand-raised tigers, large enclosures, experienced staff. He will have a good life there. The words land like physical blows. 60 days. 2 months. Sarah's mind races through calculations. How many mornings left waking to Rama's weight against her side? How many evenings reading to him while he dozes with his head in her lap? How many moments of connection before he's loaded into a transport crate and driven away to a place where she'll be just a memory, if tigers even have memories that work that way? She opens her mouth to argue, to present alternatives, to beg if necessary, but what comes out is simply, please. Give me time to find another solution. There has to be another way. The board members exchange glances, some sympathetic, some skeptical. It's Dr. Petrov, the behavioral specialist from Moscow, who speaks next. What other solution do you imagine, Dr. Chen? The regulations are clear. Hand-raised predators cannot remain in research facilities indefinitely. They require specialized long-term care. Unless you are proposing something outside standard protocols. The question hangs in the air, a challenge and an opening simultaneously. Sarah looks down at her hands, at the healing scratches on her wrists, and makes a decision that will change everything. I need 2 weeks. Let me research alternatives. If I can't find a viable solution that serves both conservation goals and Rama's welfare, I'll accept the transfer without further objection. Dr. Volkov studies her face for a long moment, then nods slowly. 2 weeks, Dr. Chen. But understand, this is not negotiable beyond that. We have responsibilities to the animal, to our mission, to you. Do not mistake kindness for weakness of resolve. Sarah spends the next 13 days in a state of fevered research, sleeping 3 hours a night, consuming everything she can find about alternative approaches to captive tiger management, about sanctuaries that allow long-term human-animal bonds, about legal frameworks in different countries that might permit what she's beginning to imagine. The possibilities narrow quickly. Most facilities have strict no-contact policies for adult big cats. Insurance, liability, safety regulations, the barriers multiply with every article she reads. But then, on day 11, she finds it, a small paragraph in an obscure conservation journal about an experimental program in the Russian Far East, a sanctuary specifically designed for unreleasable tigers with an educational component that involves long-term keeper relationships. The program is controversial, operating on provisional permits, but it exists. It's real. Sarah spends 6 hours on spotty internet connection researching the facility, then another for tracking down a phone number, then finally, heart-pounding, makes the call. The director, a woman named Katerina Sokolov, listens to Sarah's rapid explanation with occasional questions that suggest she's heard similar stories before. When Sarah finally runs out of words, there's a long pause. "How old are you, Dr. Chen?" Katerina asks, her English accented but clear. The question surprises Sarah. 32. Why does that matter? Because what you are proposing, relocating to remote sanctuary, dedicating your life to a single animal, sacrificing conventional career path, this is not a decision to make lightly. This is a decision that will define the next 20 years of your existence. Maybe more. Katerina's voice softened slightly. I am not discouraging you. I am simply being honest about what this means. You will be choosing him over almost everything else. Over relationships that cannot accommodate this devotion. Over professional opportunities that require mobility. Over the illusion that you can have a normal life. Is this what you want? Sarah looks across the room to where Rama is visible through the window, lying in the late afternoon sun, his fur burnished gold in the light. Even from this distance she can see the rise and fall of his breathing, can picture the exact weight of his head in her lap, can hear his greeting chuff in her memory. The answer rises from somewhere deeper than logic or career planning or reasonable life choices. Yes, she says simply. This is what I want. The next conservation board meeting has a different energy. Sarah presents her proposal with materials printed and bound, a thick folder of research supporting the viability of Katerina's program, letters of recommendation from international wildlife organizations, a detailed timeline for transition and ongoing veterinary contributions Sarah can make from the sanctuary location. She's even secured provisional approval from Katerina to join the staff as resident veterinarian, contingent on bringing Rama with her. The board members page through the documents, asking pointed questions about funding, about oversight, about what happens if the experimental program loses its permits. Sarah answers everything, her preparation thorough, but she can feel the real question underneath all the others. Are they willing to let her do this, to essentially reshape her entire life around a single tiger who should have died on that frozen morning 8 months ago? Dr. Volkov removes his glasses, cleans them slowly, a habit Sarah has learned means he's considering something seriously. This sanctuary program, it is legitimate? You have verified this personally? Sarah nods. I've spoken with Katerina Sokolov multiple times. I've reviewed their permits, their safety protocols, their educational outreach data. They have 6 adult tigers currently, all unreleasable for various reasons, all in large natural enclosures. The program specifically allows for long-term keeper bonding as part of their conservation education model. People visit, they see the relationship between keeper and animal, they understand what's at stake with wild tiger populations. It's unconventional, but the conservation outcomes are documented. And you would move there permanently. This from Dr. Petrov, his tone skeptical. To the middle of nowhere, living in staff housing, earning minimal salary, all for one tiger. Yes. Sarah's voice is steady. I would. The silence that follows feels eternal. Finally Dr. Volkov speaks, his voice carrying both resignation and something that might be respect. I think you are perhaps a little bit crazy, Dr. Chen. But I also think that maybe conservation needs people who are willing to be crazy in this particular way. The board will vote, but I will recommend conditional approval. 2-year trial period. If the arrangement proves sustainable and Rama adapts well, we support it continuing. If not, we revisit the question of his placement. He leans forward, his eyes serious. But understand, if you do this, there is no going back. You are binding yourself to this animal for the duration of his life. That is not a decision you can unmake when it becomes inconvenient or difficult or lonely. Are you certain? Sarah thinks about certainty, about how little of life can ever be truly certain, about how the only things she's ever been completely sure of have been the ones that made no rational sense. Choosing to become a veterinarian when her parents wanted her to be a doctor for humans. Accepting this remote posting in Siberia when she could have stayed in comfortable American facilities. Wrapping a dying cub in her jacket when protocol said to walk away. Every important choice she's ever made has been a leap into uncertainty, trusting something deeper than logic. I'm certain, she says, and feels the truth of it settle into her bones like a vow, like the beginning of a story she can't see the end of but knows she has to live. 3 weeks later, Sarah stands in the pre-dawn darkness outside the research station, watching as Rama is loaded into the specialized transport vehicle that will carry them both to their new life. He's anxious about the crate, vocalizing his displeasure, and Sarah speaks to him constantly through the ventilation slots, her voice the thread connecting him to safety in this confusing situation. The journey takes 3 days, traveling rough roads through some of the most remote territory Sarah has ever seen, stopping frequently to check on Rama, to offer water and food, to maintain the connection that's become as necessary to her as breathing. Maria hugs her goodbye at the station, tears in both their eyes, and even Dr. Volkov's face shows emotion when he shakes her hand and tells her she's done good work, that Rama is lucky to have her, that he hopes this impossible choice leads to something beautiful. Yuri simply hands her a worn book of Russian poetry and says, for the long nights. You will need this. The sanctuary appears through the trees like an answered prayer, sprawling across hundreds of acres of forested land, natural enclosures visible in the distance, the sound of flowing water from the creek that runs through the property. Katerina meets them personally, a tall woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and eyes that have seen too much to judge anyone's choices harshly. She directs the transport to Rama's new home, a 50-acre enclosure with varied terrain, dens and caves, trees for climbing, a section of the creek diverted through the space. It's more than Sarah dared hope for, and when they finally open the crate and Rama steps out into this vast new territory, she sees his confusion, his fear of the unfamiliar, the way he looks back at her as if asking whether this is safe. Sarah steps into the enclosure behind him, and Katerina doesn't stop her even though it's probably against protocol. Rama needs her presence to explore, needs her scent and voice to make this strange place feel like it could become home. They walk together through the enclosure, Sarah pointing out features like she's giving a tour, Rama staying close, occasionally pressing against her leg for reassurance. The sun rises over the sanctuary, painting everything gold and green, and Sarah feels something she hasn't felt in months, the possibility that this might actually work, that love and professional purpose might not have to be mutually exclusive, that the impossible choice she's made could lead somewhere beautiful rather than just somewhere painful. But that first night, when she leaves to sleep in the staff housing and Rama realizes she's not staying in his space, he begins to cry. The sound carries across the sanctuary, a distress call that tears through Sarah's chest like claws. She lies in her narrow bed in the cabin, listening to him call for her, her own tears soaking the pillow, wondering if she's made a terrible mistake, if bringing him here has just created new trauma, if love is sometimes nothing more than a different kind of cruelty. At 3 in the morning she can't take it anymore. Sarah pulls on her boots and jacket, grabs a flashlight, and walks through the darkness to Rama's enclosure. She finds him at the fence line closest to the staff housing, still calling, his voice hoarse now. When he sees her, his entire body shifts, the tension releasing, a sound of relief escaping him that's somehow even more heartbreaking than the crying. Sarah sits on the ground just outside the fence, and Rama presses his body against the chain link from the inside, as close as the barrier allows. They stay like that until dawn, Sarah talking to him quietly about everything and nothing, about how change is hard but they'll figure it out together, about how this new place will become familiar, about how she's not leaving him even though the sleeping arrangements have changed. When the sun rises, Rama has fallen asleep against the fence, his breathing deep and steady, and Sarah has made another decision. She'll ask Katerina if she can sleep in a tent inside the enclosure until Rama adjusts. It's probably against every rule, probably dangerous, probably ridiculous. But then again, every important choice she's made in the past year has been ridiculous, and somehow they've survived this long. Why stop now? The adjustment takes 6 weeks of patience that tests every reserve Sarah has. Rama's distress gradually diminishes as he begins to understand that Sarah's departures are temporary, that she returns every morning, that this place is permanent even if it's strange. Katerina allows the tent arrangement with strict safety protocols, and slowly Rama begins to explore his new territory with more confidence, discovering the creek, learning to fish, establishing favorite spots for sunbathing and observation. Sarah watches him claim this space as his own, watches wildness emerge in new ways now that he has room to express it, and feels a bittersweet mixture of pride and loss. He's becoming who he's supposed to be, which means growing beyond the small cub who needed her for everything, developing independence even as their bond remains. The breakthrough comes on a morning in early autumn when Sarah arrives for her daily visit and finds Rama hasn't rushed to greet her at the gate. Panic flares immediately. Is he sick, injured, trapped somewhere? But then she spots him by the creek, completely absorbed in stalking a fish, his focus intense and undivided. Sarah watches quietly as he pounces, misses, tries again. This time his paw connects, flipping the fish onto the bank where he catches it with triumphant efficiency. Only then does he look up, see Sarah watching, and release the distinctive chuff of greeting, trotting over with his prize to show her what he's accomplished. The message is clear, he doesn't need her for survival anymore, but he still wants to share his victories with her, still chooses her presence even when it's not necessary. That's when Sarah finally understands what they're building here are not dependents, but something closer to chosen family, the kind of bond that exists because both parties want it, not because either needs it to survive. 3 months into their sanctuary life, Sarah has developed a routine that feels sustainable. She works morning veterinary rounds with the other resident animals, spends midday with Rama allowing him to set the terms of interaction, handles afternoon educational tours where visitors observe their relationship from safe distances, writes research notes in the evening documenting behavioral observations that might contribute to broader conservation knowledge. Katerina proves to be an unexpected mentor, someone who understands the complexity of loving animals while serving larger conservation goals, who doesn't judge Sarah's choices but also doesn't romanticize them. Other sanctuary staff become colleagues, then friends, Dmitry who manages the bear enclosures, Olga who handles public relations, young Alexei who dreams of becoming a wildlife veterinarian and follows Sarah around asking constant questions. Life develops texture, community, purpose beyond just Rama, though he remains the center around which everything else orbits. The first time Sarah sees Rama from outside his enclosure, watching from the observation deck as he interacts with visiting school children who press their faces against the viewing glass, she experiences a moment of profound dislocation. His massive now, nearly 200 pounds at just over a year old, his movements liquid power, his presence commanding. The children gasp and point, simultaneously thrilled and frightened by his proximity, and Sarah sees him through their eyes, wild, dangerous, magnificent. For a moment he's not Rama who sleeps beside her tent and Rama who chirps when happy, but rather an apex predator, a creature that could kill her without effort if he chose. The cognitive dissonance is dizzying. Then Rama looks up, finds her in the crowd on the observation deck, and releases that specific chuff that means he's noticed her. The children exclaim about the sound, and Katerina uses the moment for education, explaining tiger communication, the bond between keeper and animal, the years of trust required to build this kind of relationship. Sarah watches Rama watch her, and understands that both truths exist simultaneously. He is dangerous, and he is her family. He is wild, and he has chosen her. These things don't contradict each other, they exist in the liminal space between categories, in the place where connection transcends the limitations of language and species. That night, sitting in her tent while Rama dozes nearby, Sarah writes in her personal journal, and not the scientific one, but the private record she keeps of her internal journey. She writes about how her definition of love has expanded to include this: the willingness to be vulnerable to something that could destroy her, the choice to trust across barriers that shouldn't be crossable, the recognition that the most meaningful connections often make the least rational sense. She writes about fear, too, about the knowledge that every day could be the day Rama's wild nature overwhelms his affection, that she's betting her life on a relationship that exists outside normal parameters. But then she looks up, sees him sleeping with one ear angled toward her tent, his body relaxed but his awareness tracking her presence even in sleep, and she knows the bet is one she'd make again and again, that some things are worth the risk even when you can't calculate the odds. Winter arrives harsh and beautiful, the sanctuary transformed into a landscape of snow and ice that reminds Sarah of that first morning when she found Rama. He's grown his winter coat, his fur thick and luxurious, and she watches him play in the snow with joy that's almost childlike despite his size. He rolls and pounces, chases his own tail, digs tunnels through drifts with serious concentration. Sarah brings her camera, documenting these moments for the sanctuary's education program, but also just because she wants to remember this: Rama in his element, perfectly adapted to this environment, alive when he should have died. The 1-year anniversary of his rescue passes quietly. Sarah marks it by spending the entire day in his enclosure, bringing her lunch, her notebooks, content to simply exist in his space while he goes about his business. At sunset he approaches where she's sitting against a tree, lowers his massive body beside her with a grunt of satisfaction, and rests his head on her leg. The weight is enormous, the trust implicit in the gesture even more so. Sarah runs her hand along his jaw, feeling the muscle and bone beneath the fur, the purr that starts deep in his chest and vibrates through both their bodies. "Happy birthday, Rama," she whispers. "We made it. Just like I promised." His eyes are half closed, golden and content, and in this moment Sarah feels something close to peace, the sense that despite everything, the sacrifice, the unconventional choices, the life that looks nothing like what she planned, she's exactly where she's supposed to be, doing exactly what she was meant to do. The satisfaction is quiet but complete, the kind that doesn't need external validation because it comes from alignment between action and truth, between the life you're living and the person you're becoming. As winter gives way to spring and Rama approaches his 2nd year, Sarah begins to notice subtle changes in their dynamic that signal his transition into full adulthood. His play becomes rougher, his strength more difficult to manage, moments where she has to set boundaries that he tests with adolescent determination. He's not trying to hurt her, she knows that, can read the difference between playfulness and aggression in every line of his body, but the margin for error is shrinking. A playful swat that would have been harmless 6 months ago now leaves her with bruises that take weeks to fade. She adjusts her approach, becomes more cautious about physical contact, establishes clearer rules for their interactions. Katerina watches these adaptations with approval, occasionally offering suggestions from her decades of experience, never suggesting that Sarah end the relationship but helping her navigate its evolution. The educational value of their bond has proven significant, visitor numbers have increased, documentary crews have filmed their story, donations to the sanctuary have tripled. The Conservation Board's 2-year evaluation is approaching, and all metrics suggest the experimental program is succeeding. But Sarah barely thinks about metrics or evaluations or justifications anymore. Those external measures feel increasingly irrelevant to the actual lived experience of loving Rama, of building a life around their connection, of discovering daily what it means to maintain a relationship that exists in the space between wild and tame, between human and animal, between all the categories humans create to make sense of the world. On a warm afternoon in late spring, Sarah sits with Rama by the creek, both of them watching dragonflies hover over the water. He's sprawled in the sun, completely relaxed, while she leans against his side reading a veterinary journal. To anyone observing, they look like the most natural thing in the world, a woman and her tiger, existing in easy companionship. But Sarah knows the truth is more complex, that every moment of this ease is built on years of learning each other's languages, of adjusting expectations, of choosing connection despite the impossibility of ever fully understanding each other. She thinks about the question Katerina asked during that first phone call, "Is this what you want?" And Sarah knows now what she couldn't have fully understood then, that wanting something and choosing it every day despite its difficulty are not the same thing, that the most meaningful parts of life require constant renewal of commitment, that love is less about a single decision and more about the 1,000 small choices to stay present, stay open, stay willing to be changed by the relationship even when change is uncomfortable. The dragonflies dance, Rama's breathing rises and falls against her back, the sun warms her face. And Sarah closes her eyes, lets herself have this perfect moment, holds it carefully in her memory against all the imperfect moments that will inevitably come. This is what she wanted. This is what she chose. This is what she continues to choose, every morning when she wakes and walks to his enclosure, every night when she says goodnight and returns to her cabin, every day in between when she shows up for this impossible love that has become the organizing principle of her entire life. The 2-year evaluation arrives and passes with unanimous approval for the program's continuation. Sarah barely registers the victory, too busy managing a minor health scare when Rama develops a respiratory infection that requires daily medication. Getting a 400-pound tiger to accept oral antibiotics becomes a lesson in patience and negotiation, but Rama trusts her enough to allow the treatment, and within 2 weeks he's recovered fully. Dr. Volkov visits during the summer, his first time seeing the sanctuary, and Sarah watches his face as he observes her working with Rama, sees the shift from skepticism to something like wonder. Before he leaves, Volkov pulls her aside, his expression serious but warm. "You have built something remarkable here, Dr. Chen. I will admit, I had doubts. I thought perhaps you were running from something rather than toward something. But I see now I was wrong. You have found a way to serve both the animal and the mission. This is rare. This is valuable." He pauses, then adds quietly, "This is also not sustainable forever. You know this, yes? Tigers live 15, perhaps 20 years in captivity. You are building toward a loss that will come, that cannot be prevented." Sarah nods, throat tight. "I know. I've always known. And yet you choose it anyway. It's not a question. And yet I choose it anyway," Sarah confirms. Volkov nods slowly, respectfully, as if acknowledging something he understands but couldn't do himself. The conversation stays with Sarah for days, the reminder that time moves in only one direction, that every year brings Rama closer to the natural end of his life while she still has decades ahead. She tries not to think about it too much, tries to stay present to the current rather than borrowing grief from the future, but some nights she lies awake calculating, imagining, preparing her heart for a loss that already aches despite being years away. Years pass in a rhythm of seasons and milestones, of small changes and large continuities. Rama reaches his full growth, 450 pounds of muscle and power, his presence commanding enough that even experienced staff approach his enclosure with caution. But with Sarah he remains gentle, their communication so refined that she can read his mood from across the enclosure, can anticipate his needs before he expresses them, can move through his space with confidence that comes from deep mutual understanding. She turns 35, then 37, then 40, her life measured not by conventional markers of success but by the accumulation of days spent in service to this bond that has become her life's defining feature. She dates occasionally, relationships that never quite take root because no one can accept her devotion to Rama, the fact that he's not just her work but her family, that she's chosen a life that has little room for conventional partnership. Sarah makes peace with this gradually, understanding that some paths are walked alone, that the choice to love unconventionally means accepting limitations in other areas. There's loneliness in this recognition, but also a kind of freedom, the clarity that comes from knowing exactly what matters most and building life accordingly. The sanctuary becomes her complete world, the other animals she cares for, the staff who become family, the visitors she educates, the research she publishes on human-animal bonds that challenges conventional wisdom about appropriate distance. Rama remains the center, but the edges fill in with community and purpose that make the unconventional life feel less like sacrifice and more like fulfillment. On her 40th birthday, Sarah spends the day with Rama as she does every year, bringing a special meal that meets both his dietary needs and her desire to mark the occasion. He's 6 years old now, in his prime, magnificent and powerful and unmistakably wild despite their bond. She sits beside him while he eats, her hand resting on his shoulder, feeling the shift of muscle beneath fur, the warmth of him, the simple fact of his continued existence. "Thank you," she tells him quietly, not sure exactly what she's thanking him for surviving, for choosing her, for teaching her what love looks like when it refuses to be contained by category or expectation, but knowing the gratitude is real and necessary. As if understanding, Rama pauses in his meal, turns his massive head, and presses his nose against her chest in a gesture of affection he's been doing since cubhood, now scaled to his adult size. Sarah wraps her arms as far around his neck as they'll reach, rests her forehead against his fur, breathes in his scent that's become as familiar as her own, and lets herself feel the full weight of this love, its joy and its terror, its gift and its inevitable cost. That night she writes in her journal, "What we have cannot be quantified in scientific terms, and perhaps that's exactly what makes it valuable, the immeasurable space where two souls recognize each other across the barrier of species and language. I used to think love meant holding on. Now I understand it means showing up, being present, accepting what is rather than controlling what might be. Rama has taught me this. Every day with him is both everything and not enough, and somehow that's exactly right." The entry sits on the page like a prayer, like acceptance, like the beginning of understanding that would take years more to fully mature. But it's there now, planted, the seed of wisdom that will help her navigate what comes next, the gradual movement from prime into decline, from present into memory, from connection in the flesh to connection that transcends physical presence. Sarah doesn't know this yet, not fully, but some part of her is preparing, building the emotional architecture that will be needed when the mathematics of mortality finally come due. For now, though, there's the woman and a tiger, sitting together under Siberian stars, connected by a bond that makes no sense and all the sense in the world, choosing each other against every reasonable objection, proving that sometimes the most impossible things are also the most real. The years continue their steady march, and with them comes the first whisper of what Sarah has been dreading since before she can remember actively dreading it. Rama is 12 years old when she notices the subtle stiffness in his gait one morning, the way he rises from rest a fraction more slowly, the joints that don't move quite as fluidly as they did even 6 months prior. The veterinarian in her recognizes arthritis beginning its inevitable work, the natural wear on a body that was built for power but not for longevity. She adjusts his diet, adds supplements, consults with specialists about pain management protocols that balance comfort with quality of life. Rama accepts these new interventions with his characteristic patience, trusting her even when the treatments are uncomfortable, and Sarah's heart breaks a little more each day watching times advance on the body she knows as well as her own. The changes accelerate gradually, then suddenly, the way aging always works. At 13, Rama moves like an old man, careful and deliberate, his play days mostly behind him. He sleeps more, sprawled in patches of sun, his breathing heavy with the weight of years. Sarah adjusts everything to accommodate him, shorter visits so he's not overtaxed, more time simply sitting in companionable silence, her expectations matching his declining energy. She finds herself watching him obsessively when he doesn't know she's observing, cataloging every movement, every breath, trying to memorize the exact way. He exists in space before that existence changes further. At 14 comes the first serious health crisis, kidney issues that require intensive intervention, medications administered multiple times daily, Sarah essentially moving into his enclosure for 3 weeks of around-the-clock monitoring. Other staff cover her responsibilities, the entire sanctuary mobilizing around Rama's crisis as if understanding that he's not just another resident animal but the beating heart of why this place exists, why any of them believe in doing this impossible work. Sarah sleeps 2 hours at a time, wakes to check vitals and adjust fours, lives in a state of hypervigilance that strips everything away except this singular focus: keep him alive, keep him comfortable, keep him here just a little longer. The crisis passes, Rama recovers, but Sarah sees in Katerina's eyes what neither of them wants to say aloud. This was a warning shot, the first of what will be many, each one bringing him closer to the ending that can no longer be indefinitely delayed. Sarah goes back to her cabin after Rama stabilized and sleeps for 16 hours straight, her body shutting down from exhaustion and relief and the emotional toll of staring at loss and being granted reprieve. When she wakes, it's to devastating clarity. She's living in borrowed time now, every day a gift that could be revoked without warning, and she needs to decide how she wants to live these remaining months or years, in dread of what's coming or in gratitude for what remains. The choice isn't easy, but Sarah makes it consciously: gratitude, presence, showing up fully even knowing each moment could be among the last. She becomes more deliberate in her time with Rama, less distracted by other tasks, more willing to simply sit with him in silence, to honor what is rather than grieving what will be before it's actually gone. She brings her camera, documents their daily interactions with new urgency, wanting evidence that this all happened, that this bond was real, that love can look like this if you're brave enough and foolish enough to let it. She writes more in her personal journal, trying to capture the texture of their relationship in words, knowing language is inadequate but needing to try anyway, needing to pin down the ephemeral before it vanishes completely. Rama seems to sense the shift in her energy, becomes more vocal when she arrives each morning, more demonstrative in his affection, pressing against her with his full weight in ways that require her to brace herself or be knocked over. It's as if he's saying, "I'm still here, we're still us, don't mourn me while I'm alive." Sarah receives the message, adjusts her approach, finds the balance between awareness of impermanence and appreciation for present reality. They develop new rituals suited to Rama's reduced mobility, long afternoons where Sarah reads to him from books of poetry and natural history, her voice a soundtrack to his dozing, both of them content with proximity that demands nothing. Quiet evenings where she sits at the boundary of his enclosure after he's settled for the night, keeping watch like a guardian, like a parent, like someone who has made a promise to show up regardless of whether showing up changes anything. Moments of play that are brief but precious, Rama batting at a leaf with one massive paw, Sarah laughing at the flicker of youth still visible beneath the aged exterior, both of them pretending for just a second that time isn't doing what it's doing. At 15, Rama is unmistakably elderly, his muzzle graying, his body carrying the weight of years in every movement. Sarah has become expert at reading his pain levels, knows when he needs medication adjustment, when gentle massage helps, when he simply needs space to rest without well-meaning human interference. She's learned that love at this stage looks like management, like careful attention to detail, like the constant calculation of trade-offs between extending life and maintaining quality of that life. The visitors still come, still marvel at their bond, but Sarah finds herself resenting the intrusion more now, wanting to hoard these remaining days rather than share them with strangers who can't possibly understand what they're witnessing. Katerina gently reminds her that the educational mission matters, that Rama's story is helping people understand why conservation matters, why these magnificent creatures deserve protection and respect. Sarah knows Katerina is right but doesn't particularly care. Her world has contracted to this single priority, this single relationship, everything else background noise to the main event of loving Rama through his decline. The first conversation about euthanasia happens on a cold morning in late autumn. Rama just passed his 15th birthday, his kidney function declining despite aggressive management. The veterinary consultant from Moscow examines him, reviews blood work, delivers the assessment Sarah already knows but has been avoiding. His quality of life is diminishing, pain management is becoming more complex, the trajectory is clear. You have perhaps weeks, possibly months, the consultant says, not unkindly. But I recommend you begin considering end-of-life planning. When the time comes, you want to be prepared to give him the gift of dignity rather than waiting until crisis forces your hand. Sarah nods mechanically, hears the words, understands their medical accuracy, and feels something inside her shut down, a protective mechanism against information too devastating to process. She thanks the consultant, sees him out, and then walks to Rama's enclosure where she sits on the cold ground and allows herself to sob, great heaving cries that come from somewhere primal, the sound of grief that can't be reasoned with or managed or made professional. Rama, hearing her distress, approaches slowly, lowers himself beside her with a grunt of effort, and presses his massive head against her chest the way he's done since cubhood. The gesture nearly destroys her remaining composure entirely, the fact that he's comforting her when he's the one suffering, when she's supposed to be the caregiver, when the natural order should flow the other direction. Sarah wraps her arms around his neck, buries her face in his fur, and whispers everything she hasn't let herself say, I'm not ready. I'm never going to be ready. I don't know how to live without you. You saved me, you know that? That frozen morning 24 years ago, we saved each other, and I don't know who I am if I'm not the person who loves you. Rama purrs, the rumble vibrating through both their bodies, and Sarah holds on like he's the only solid thing in a world that's spinning apart, which in this moment feels completely true. They stay like that until the sun sets, until the cold becomes uncomfortable, until Sarah's body goes numb and she has to shift positions. When she finally stands to leave, her legs cramping, her face raw from crying, Rama watches her with eyes that seem to hold understanding beyond what should be possible, and Sarah makes a silent vow: when the time comes, she'll be brave enough to give him the final gift, to choose his comfort over her need, to love him enough to let him go. But not yet. Please, not yet. The days that follow are both precious and painful, each one a gift Sarah doesn't take for granted, while simultaneously dreading the next change, the next decline, the next indicator that time is running out. She consults with Katerina, with the vet team, with colleagues who have walked this path before with animals they loved. Everyone's advice is the same: watch for signs that pain outweighs pleasure, that life has become burden rather than gift, that his wild dignity is being eroded by suffering he can't understand or consent to. Trust yourself to know when, even though knowing when will be the hardest thing you ever do. Sarah watches Rama with new intensity, cataloging every moment, searching for the invisible line that will tell her when enough is enough, when love demands the unbearable. At 16, Rama's decline accelerates noticeably. He stops. Eating with his former enthusiasm requires coaxing to finish meals. His pain medication needs constant adjustment, the balance between effective relief and dangerous sedation becoming harder to maintain. He moves less, sleeps more, sometimes wakes with confusion that breaks Sarah's heart. Still he greets her each morning with that distinctive chuff, still his eyes follow her movement around the enclosure, still he presses against her when she sits beside him, the connection enduring even as his body fails. Sarah begins staying overnight in the enclosure more frequently, abandoning her cabin to sleep in the tent beside him, her presence the only thing that seems to ease his restlessness. Staff members bring her meals, handle her other responsibilities without complaint, giving her the space to do what she needs to do, what they all understand is the final act of their long partnership. The morning Sarah knows, she knows completely. She arrives to find Rama hasn't risen to greet her, hasn't moved from his resting spot, his breathing labored in a way that medication can't ease anymore. She sits beside him, places her hand on his chest to feel the too fast heartbeat, looks into eyes that hold pain despite their best efforts to prevent it, and understands, this is the moment. Today is the day. The knowledge hits like a physical blow, but underneath the grief is something else, a kind of terrible clarity, the recognition that this is her final act of love, that choosing his peace over her need is the ultimate expression of the bond they've built. Sarah calls Katerina, calls the vet team, and says the words that tear her apart: it's time. Today. I need to do this today. The preparations take 3 hours that feel simultaneously too fast and too slow. Sarah spends them with Rama, talking to him constantly, telling him everything she's never said or has said 1,000 times. It doesn't matter, the words are both for him and for her, a way to mark the ending, to make it real, to give voice to 24 years of connection that changed everything about who she is. You gave me purpose, she tells him, her voice breaking. You taught me that love transcends every barrier we create, that connection is possible even when it shouldn't be, that showing up is sometimes the only thing that matters. You made me brave in ways I didn't know I needed to be brave. You made my life make sense. Rama's eyes are half open, his breathing heavy, but she swears he's listening, that some part of him understands this is goodbye, that she's releasing him from the burden of staying alive just because she can't imagine existing without him. The vet team arrives in early afternoon, their movements quiet and respectful, everyone understanding the gravity of this moment. They set up the equipment while Sarah holds Rama's massive head in her lap, stroking the fur around his ears, memorizing the exact weight and warmth and texture of him, storing every sensory detail against the absence that's coming. Katerina stands nearby, her own eyes wet, witness to this final act of impossible love. The sedative goes first, helping Rama relax into something approaching peace, his pain finally easing completely, his body loosening its tight grip on suffering. Sarah watches his face soften, sees the tension leave his muscles, and feels grateful for this mercy even as she dreads what comes next. She has perhaps 10 minutes before the final injection, 10 minutes to say everything left unsaid, 10 minutes of shared existence before the division between alive and dead cleaves her world in two. She uses the time to tell him thank you. Thank you for surviving when he should have died. Thank you for choosing her across every divide of species and language. Thank you for teaching her that family isn't defined by blood or convention but by the choice to love without reservation. Thank you for 24 years of presence, of connection, of being exactly who he was without apology or compromise. Thank you for allowing her to build her life around loving him, for making that choice feel like privilege rather than sacrifice. Thank you for every morning greeting, every shared silence, every moment of recognition that passed between them like electricity, like grace, like the universe acknowledging that sometimes two beings simply belong to each other regardless of how impossible that belonging appears from the outside. The veterinarian looks at Sarah with gentle inquiry, waiting for permission to proceed, and Sarah nods because delaying won't change anything, will only extend suffering she's promised to prevent. The final injection goes into the catheter they've placed, and Sarah watches as Rama's breathing slows, deepens, becomes the long exhale that doesn't require an inhale to follow. She feels the exact moment his heart stops beneath her palm, the cessation of beat that marks the end of everything, and the sound that comes out of her is something between sob and howl, grief made audible, love transformed by loss into raw noise that carries across the sanctuary and brings staff members to tears even from a distance. Sarah holds Rama long after he's gone, her face pressed against his fur, her body shaking with sobs that come from somewhere deeper than thought, deeper than language, from the place where attachment lives beneath all our civilized denials of how much we need the beings we love. Katerina and the vet team give her time, standing back respectfully, letting her have these private moments with death, with ending, with the unbearable reality that won't be made bearable by any amount of preparation. Eventually, an hour later, maybe more, Sarah releases her hold, sits back, and looks at Rama's body that's already becoming just body, the essential aliveness that made him Rama already dissipated into whatever mystery follows death. She's devastated and also oddly calm, the way people sometimes are after the worst thing happens and they discover they can survive it, that love doesn't end just because the beloved's physical presence does, that connection has dimensions beyond flesh and breath. Thank you, she says one final time, and this time she's speaking not to Rama but to the universe, to whatever forces aligned to bring them together, to the gift of having loved this completely even knowing loss was inevitable. The days following Rama's death pass in a haze of grief and ritual and the peculiar emptiness of a life suddenly without its organizing principle. The sanctuary holds a memorial service, staff and visitors gathering to honor Rama's impact, to acknowledge that he was more than just a tiger but a teacher, an ambassador, a being whose life mattered beyond conservation statistics. Sarah stands before the assembled group and tries to articulate what he meant, but the words feel inadequate against the magnitude of her loss, the sheer scale of how much space he occupied in her world and how impossibly vast that space seems now that it's empty. She manages to say, "He taught me that love is a choice we make every day, that showing up is sacred work, that connection transcends every boundary we think limits what's possible. I am forever changed by having known him." That's what love does, it changes us, and the change endures even after the beloved is gone. The sanctuary converts Rama's enclosure into a memorial garden, native plants and a stone marker engraved with his name and years, a place where people can visit and remember. Sarah finds she can't go there yet, the sight of the space without him too painful, but she knows eventually she will, knows that memory needs physical anchoring even when the anchoring hurts. For now she simply moves through her days performing the actions required to continue existing, rising, eating, working with other animals, sleeping. The routines hold her together when internal structure feels completely dissolved, the way routines always do in early grief. Katerina checks on her daily, sometimes just sitting in silence, sometimes sharing stories of her own losses, of animals she's loved and mourned, of how grief transforms over time from acute agony to chronic ache to eventual integration into the texture of life. You don't move on, Katerina tells her one evening over tea. You move forward, carrying what was with you, letting it become part of you rather than something you need to leave behind. Rama is not separate from you now. He's woven into who you've become. That's the gift and the burden of love. Sarah absorbs this wisdom, turns it over in her mind during sleepless nights, begins to understand dimly that survival means finding a way to hold both grief and ongoing life simultaneously, to make space for loss without being consumed by it. 3 months after Rama's death, the sanctuary receives a call about a tiger cub found in circumstances eerily similar to Rama's discovery, abandoned by mother, hypothermic, near death, requiring immediate intensive intervention. The staff debates whether to tell Sarah, whether asking her to take on another case like this is cruel given her recent loss, but ultimately Katerina makes the call, approaches Sarah's cabin, and delivers the information with careful neutrality, making clear that Sarah can decline, that no one expects her to repeat this journey, that she's given enough already. Sarah's first response is instinctive rejection. She can't. Won't. The thought of starting over, of building that kind of bond again knowing how it ends, feels impossible, feels like betrayal of what she had with Rama, feels like signing up for future devastation when she's barely surviving present devastation. She tells Katerina no, absolutely not, someone else needs to handle this case. But that night, lying awake in darkness, Sarah thinks about the cub fighting for survival, about whether someone will care for it with the kind of attention that makes survival possible, about whether love is something you do once and then close yourself off from or something you risk again despite knowing the cost. She thinks about what Rama taught her, that connection matters more than safety, that showing up is sacred, that love multiplies rather than divides when you let it. And she thinks about who she is now, after 24 years of loving Rama, whether she's someone who closes down after loss or someone who remains open despite loss, and which of those people she wants to be. At dawn, Sarah walks to the clinic where the new cub is being stabilized, peers through the window at the small orange form in the warming box, sees the too familiar sight of a life hanging by a thread, and feels something shift inside her chest. Not replacement, nothing could replace Rama, but recognition that her capacity to love wasn't used up, that the heart expands to hold new connections while still honoring old ones, that moving forward doesn't mean forgetting but rather carrying what was into what will be. She enters the clinic, approaches the warming box, and looks down at the cub who opens cloudy eyes and makes a sound so like the sound Rama made 24 years ago that Sarah's breath catches. It's not the same. It will never be the same. But maybe same isn't the point. Maybe the point is choosing to show up, choosing to care, choosing to let love happen again despite knowing exactly how much it will cost eventually. Sarah places her hand against the warming box glass, feels the faint warmth from inside, and makes her decision. Tell Katerina I'll take the case, she says to the night shift assistant. Provisional basis. We'll see how it goes. The words are guarded, protective, but underneath them runs a current of commitment she can't quite hide from herself, the recognition that she's saying yes not just to this cub but to remaining open, to continuing to believe in the value of connection even when connection means eventual loss. The cub, as if sensing something important has shifted, presses a tiny paw against the glass from inside, and Sarah feels tears slip down her cheeks, grief for Rama, fear of future loss, gratitude for the capacity to feel both, all of it tangled together in the messy complexity of a heart that's been broken but hasn't been closed. 6 months later, Sarah has settled into new rhythms with the cub she's named Aurora, chosen because it means dawn, because it suggests beginning after darkness, because it honors the cycle of ending and starting that seems to define her life now. Aurora is nothing like Rama, her personality different, her needs requiring different approaches, her presence distinctly her own, and Sarah is grateful for these differences, for the way they prevent comparison, for the space they create for this to be a new relationship rather than attempt at recreation. She still grieves Rama, probably will always grieve him in some form, but the grief has shifted from crushing weight to carried burden, from thing that destroys to thing that shapes but doesn't define. She visits his memorial garden now, brings fresh flowers in summer, sits on the bench nearby and talks to him in her mind, updating him on Aurora, on sanctuary life, on how she's managing to continue despite the hole his absence created. Sometimes she swears she feels his presence, not in any supernatural sense but in the way we carry our beloveds forward, the way their influence persists in how we move through the world, the choices we make, the values we prioritize. Rama taught her how to love without reservation, and that lesson didn't end with his death. It continues to shape her approach to Aurora, to her work, to life itself. She's different now than she was before him, braver, more open, less defended against the inevitable pain of caring deeply. That difference is his legacy, the proof that their bond mattered, that love changes things permanently even when the beloved is gone. On Aurora's 6-month anniversary at the sanctuary, Sarah sits in the enclosure watching the cub play, her movements so different from Rama's but equally captivating, equally worthy of attention and devotion. She thinks about the question Katerina asked all those years ago, "Is this what you want?" And Sarah understands now that the answer isn't static, isn't something you decide once and live with forever, but rather something you choose repeatedly, daily, in the face of all the reasons not to choose it. Yes, this is what she wants. This life of loving beings who won't live as long as her, of building connections across species boundaries, of showing up for the sacred work of caring despite knowing how it ends. It's what she chose with Rama, what she's choosing again with Aurora, what she'll probably choose again when Aurora's time comes, because apparently she's someone who believes that love is worth the cost, that connection justifies the inevitable grief, that showing up matters even when showing up can't prevent loss. Sarah stands, calls to Aurora, who bounds over with puppy-like enthusiasm, and accepts the head-but greeting with a laugh that holds both joy and sorrow, both present and past, both gratitude for what is and memory of what was. She runs her hand along Aurora's fur, feels the warm life beneath her palm, and thinks, this is grace, this moment of connection, this choosing to remain open, this refusing to let fear of future loss prevent present love. It's what Rama taught her, and it's what she'll carry forward for as long as she lives, loving whoever needs loving, showing up whoever needs showing up for, being changed by the connection she builds and changed again by the losses she survives. The sun rises over the sanctuary, dawn breaking golden and clear, temperature no longer 40 below but spring mild, everything different and everything somehow still connected to that frozen morning 24 years ago when a woman knelt beside a dying cub and made a choice that would define the rest of her life. Sarah stands in Aurora's enclosure, her breath visible in the cool morning air, and for just a moment she hears it, Rama's distinctive chuff of greeting, carried on the wind or created by memory, it doesn't matter which, the connection enduring beyond death and time and every limitation that says such things shouldn't be possible. She closes her eyes, whispers to the morning and to him and to the gift of having loved so completely, I'm still here, and you're still with me, and that's everything.